When you're building a loadout in a Battlefield game, picking a good sidearm that's going to complement your primary weapon is a very important thing to do. If you're all out of shots in your rifle or machine gun, then that trusty secondary weapon is going to come in handy to finish the job and keep you engaged in the action, instead of leaving you fumbling around with a reload, which can often throw you into a sticky situation. Usually a situation that's not going to end very well for you. There's a lot of sidearms to pick from in the Battlefield series, from your bog standard service pistols to your high powered revolvers. And although most of them look quite common and function in a pretty straightforward way, there's quite a few oddballs that have been thrown into the mix over the years that stand out from the crowd and like to do things a little bit differently. Some of them do stuff completely out of the ordinary, and others work in a normal way, but are just really bloody weird. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the most bizarre secondary weapons in the series. Here's my top 10 list of strangest sidearms in the Battlefield games. At number 10, we've got ourselves the repeater pistol M1912, which has popped up in a couple of the more recent games, Battlefields 1 and 5. From initial viewing, this might seem like a fairly normal looking pistol, apart from the fact that it's a big bulky bugger that's built like a brick shithouse, but mechanically it's definitely far from being your average everyday gun. The repeater pistol M1912, aka the Steyr, isn't like most of the other pistols, which are comfortable with magazines being shoved into their backsides, as this one would much rather have a clip stuck in its head. There aren't many clip-fed sidearms in the Battlefield games, so that already makes it one of the quirkier options to pick from. But what makes this gun even more interesting is the fact that you have to use up all your bullets if you want to slot in some more. Either that, or you've got to eject all the remaining cartridges out from the port at the top, the same port that they went in, spraying them all out like a little metal fountain. How lovely. Technically, in real life, you'd be wasting a bunch of unused rounds, but thankfully in the world of Battlefield, those rounds magically go back into your pocket, because it's just a game. This strange style of reloading bullets gives the M1912 some fairly snappy empty reloads, but some painfully long tactical ones, which is the complete opposite to how most of the other guns function, meaning you've got to remember when and whether to perform those reloads in a specific scenario. Definitely one of the more unusual sidearms in the series. In 9th place on our list of wacky secondary weapons is the lever action rifle called the Mare's Leg. Being able to equip a lever action rifle is already a pretty unorthodox thing to do in a Battlefield game, especially in Battlefield 4, which is mainly dominated by modern day military grade machine guns and advanced weaponry. But being able to whip one out and use it as a sidearm is an even crazier concept still. The gun's got a bit of a strange name, pretty much translating over to a female horse's leg. Probably because that's what it resembles, rather than it actually being about as useful as a horse's leg in the game. And this lever action rifle's got a shorter barrel than usual, which is probably the reason why you can just about pass it off as a sidearm, being able to cozily fit into a leg holster. It's a pretty old weapon for a game set in present day, with the gun originally being from 1894, but this one's a modernised version, fully customisable with attachments that you'd typically use with some of the game's primary weapons. Firing a 44 Magnum round, you can safely say that it hits people quite hard, giving it more range than the other sidearms, whilst being restricted by its lever action nature. This gives it a pretty crappy fire rate, so it's probably better suited for finish off some guy who's further away, that's already taken a bit of damage first. But nevertheless, it's still one of the more eccentric choices in the game, that fits into a different playstyle than a lot of the others. Going over to Battlefield Hardline next, with one of the most mysterious, lesser known weapons in the series, the improvised gun comes in at number 8 on the list. Now this gun's so strange it doesn't even have a proper name. The improvised gun is what it says on the label, an improvised gun. It's literally a botched together machine gun crudely assembled from bits and pieces of junk and materials, modelled after a similar looking homemade weapon that was seized by police in Brazil. I mean, look at this thing, it's weird. It looks like a little pipe with a metal box stuck underneath it. Not exactly a typical Battlefield weapon. The improvised gun gets even more interesting when you decide to customise it too, as if you go to equip a suppressor, you won't be attaching a normal one like you would with the other weapons in the game. You'd actually be attaching an oil filter to the muzzle instead, which you'd typically use with a car engine. Looks pretty edgy, but it blocks off your sight picture in ADS, which isn't very fun. The improvised gun has no official manufacturer, and it's an illegal thing to have or create, which is kinda relevant for a game centered around criminals. But still a bit of an odd thing compared to everything else in the series. And the fact that it's essentially a rapid firing machine pistol with a mag size of 30 rounds makes this thing even more unique compared to the other sidearms. Coming in at 7th on the list is the funky looking HOWDAH pistol from Battlefield 1. This pistol was literally designed for shooting tigers in the face. Sounds a bit harsh, but those are the straight facts. No, it wasn't made by Joe Exotic. It was made for use in India and Africa to fend off dangerous wildlife, mainly big hungry cats. And the one we get to use in Battlefield 1 is actually a later variant of the HOWDAH called the Lancaster pistol. Unlike your typical pistol in the Battlefield series, this gun has 4 barrels, so 3 more than normal. And if you want to reload the HOWDAH pistol, you've got to snap the front part of the frame forwards, a bit like you would with a break action shotgun, and then slot those cartridges into the back, through 4 individual holes, giving you a total ammo capacity of 4. Not exactly an impressive number of shots to have at your disposal, but when you take the weapon's power and fire rate into consideration, those 4 bullets are definitely capable of inflicting some very nasty wounds. Not many sidearms are limited to 4 bullets, but not many can dish out so much damage in such a short space of time. So not only is this a bit of an abnormal looking and functioning gun, but it's also kinda unique in the way it fits into the Battlefield series, and of course, Battlefield 1. Next weapon in the list at 6th place is the tracking dart, a non-lethal gadget that replaces your sidearm when equipped. This little thing's popped up in a few of the games, first appearing in the Bad Company titles where it was called the Tracer Dart until it was later renamed the Tracking Dart in Battlefield Hardline. It's one of the most unique sidearms you can pick from, not only because it looks like some kind of pimped up Star Wars blaster, but because it doesn't actually kill people, or it's not designed to anyway, only dishing out a measly 3 damage whenever you shoot a player. If that player happens to be extremely low on health, then one of those darts just might be enough to finish them off, which would be pretty damn unfortunate for them, and probably quite hilarious for you. But don't expect the tracking dart to rack up many kills, as they're going to be extremely rare. This sidearm functions in a totally different way to the other, much more dangerous pistols, revolvers, because as the name implies, it's used to track targets and keep them spotted, lighting them up like a Christmas tree for all of your buddies to go and shoot. Hitting players and vehicles paints a red outline around them, which you can see through walls for a set amount of time thereafter. Your teammates will probably be quite thankful of your service, because this makes life a little bit easier for them, with enemies standing out like a sore thumb, but you will be left without a lethal secondary weapon, should you choose it. So it's a pretty big sacrifice that a lot of players aren't usually willing to make. You want to know what a weird sidearm is? A bloody shotgun. Halfway down the list at number 5, we've got ourselves the Shorty 12G, which is basically a compact pump-action shotgun that can be used as a secondary weapon in Battlefield 4. It's not often you get a chance to use a shotgun as a sidearm, with them typically being restricted to the primary weapon slot in the Battlefield games. But this one's still different to the others, having a shorter barrel, limited its effective range, along with the fact that it can only hold 3 shells, giving you less opportunities to take down your targets. Now obviously, the Shorty 12G can be a devastating weapon in close quarters, just like any of the other shotguns. And the fact that it can potentially take someone nearby down in just one shot definitely makes it one of the deadliest secondary weapons you can choose. But because of its traits, it's still only effective in certain situations, quite literally making it a hit or miss gun. They can be risky but rewarding, should you choose it. The Shorty 12G still fits into the sidearm role quite well, despite the fact that it functions in a totally different way to the others, as it acts as a pretty decent finishing off tool, wiping out the remaining bit of health your opponent has without having to be particularly very accurate. If an enemy catches you out in close quarters, and you've got no bullets left in your primary weapon, whipping out the Shorty 12G will usually be a good idea. Probably not something your opponent will be expecting. In our 4th place spot on the list is the bizarre looking WELROD pistol from Battlefield 5. Quite frankly, one of the weirdest weapons of the Second World War. Now, bolt action pistols aren't exactly a very common thing to see, but bolt action pistols that also happen to have a built-in suppressor are an even rarer thing still. The WELROD pistol looks like a bit of a mashup of the Commando carbine and the Sten gun, but then somehow transformed into a pistol, and it was designed to be used as an assassin's weapon during the war. Considering it's pretty much a tube of metal with a trigger, the WELROD can pack a fairly nasty punch against players close by. But because it is a bolt action weapon, having a really crappy fire rate of just 42 RPM, it's not exactly the most reliable thing in the world, as you've got to try and make your shots count. Because it's a suppressed weapon, directional hit markers won't pop up on your enemy's screen when they get shot by the gun, making it even more useful for those stealthy players out there who prefer to flank around objective points, or the ones who prefer to sit around in bushes all day and pretend to be a shrub. The WELROD pistol isn't everyone's favourite sidearm, and it can be very situational, but it's definitely one of the strangest ones in the Battlefield franchise, hence why it makes the list. Coming in at 3rd place in the list is the smallest weapon in the Battlefield series, the ridiculous looking KOLIBRI pistol from Battlefield 1. This gun's more of a meme than a fully functioning sidearm, as although it definitely can kill players in the right scenario, you'll barely ever be in the right scenario for it to kill someone, with pretty much every other weapon in the game being able to do a much better job. It literally deals between about 1 to 5 damage per bullet, so unloading a full magazine into someone's chest at point blank range is still only going to tickle them. The KOLIBRI pistol is tiny, and its bullets are even smaller still, having the diameter of just 2.7mm, which should probably be able to kill a few ants, but it definitely struggled to take down a bloke wearing a helmet. It was invented by a guy who made watches, and it was not only a bit of an awkward thing to hold, but also a bit of a finicky thing to reload and aim with too. The trick to using the KOLIBRI, if you want to be a bit of a troll, is to hit the other guy in the head within shot of sightlines, because the KOLIBRI's got a really unique trait of having the highest headshot multiplier in the game of 5 times, which is a pretty bizarre thing for any weapon to have, let alone the smallest weapon in the franchise. This potentially makes it a viable but not ideal option for taking down snipers and prone players preoccupied on hilltops or in windows, by firing a few of those pipsqueak bullets into the back of their head. A perfect way to annoy people, but impractical for the average player, easily making it one of the strangest sidearms in Battlefield history.
Our side is in the lead.
In 2nd place, we've got another funky Battlefield 1 weapon, the MARE'S pistol. This is quite literally a modified Mosin Nagant rifle with a chopped down barrel, so what you're using is essentially a primary weapon disguised as a sidearm. It's definitely one of the more eccentric choices on offer, with the gun's skeleton looking frame being exposed to the elements, and because it is essentially a bolt action rifle, it's still going to use 5-round clips, containing those full fat rifle cartridges. This gives the MARE'S a hell of a lot more power than your average bog standard pistol, practically being a handheld cannon, being able to drop players in just one shot if they happen to be close by. It functions in a completely different way to nearly every other secondary weapon in the franchise, essentially acting as a close-range rifle. But this means that it also shares the same pros and cons, inflicting tons of damage per bullet, but at the expense of having much slower, more finicky reloads, along with the fact that you'll need to cycle the bolt after every shot, lowering that fire rate, thus making it a much riskier thing to use within its optimal range. But with that said, because it's had a big chunk of its barrel lopped off, this means that it's not going to get the same accuracy benefits that a long-range rifle would, with the MARE'S having slower travelling bullets and a pretty wild recoil pattern. It's a very situational weapon, just like a lot of the other sidearms on this list, but the MARE'S is something that can give you a lot of power in close quarters when you really need it. Just make sure you don't miss. And my number 1 strangest Battlefield sidearm is the T62 CEW taser gun from Battlefield Hardline. Taser guns aren't really a strange thing to see in real life, but in the Battlefield series, they have a bunch of really unique mechanics that make them completely different to everything else in the franchise. The fact that you can deal 100% damage in just one hit, incapacitating your enemies, sending them back to the spawn screen without actually killing them, is a pretty odd thing to do, in a game where putting bullets into people is the main objective. Zapping people at point blank range with jolts of electricity is a pretty fun way of dealing with them. It's definitely not always the easiest thing to do, with your enemy often firing fully automatic weapons in your direction, but if you land your shot precisely, you can then run over to them while they're scrambling around on the floor, interrogate them, and reveal the locations of surrounding enemies on your minimap for a short amount of time. Definitely not a trick you can pull off with a semi-automatic pistol. You've only got one chance to take down your target in a close range situation, having to reload every time you use the T62, but considering it's a non-lethal gun with so many unique mechanics, having such a high power output whilst not actually killing anyone, makes it one of the strangest secondary weapons in the Battlefield franchise, having completely different properties to everything else you can use, whilst looking pretty crazy in a game series centered around highly lethal weapons of war. So what do you think of the strangest sidearms in the Battlefield games? Are there any others that also deserve to be on the list? Let me know your choices and top 10 lists down below in the comments. Subscribe, click the bell and apply all notifications to be the first to see new content coming up in the future, and give me a like if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching guys, have a good day, and I'll be seeing you in that next episode.